One of the hardest things to teach your children is to take responsibility for what they do. If you don't do it as children, then they grow up and they don't take responsibility for what they do either. And sometimes when we don't take responsibility for what we do, we don't learn the lesson that God's trying to teach us. We might project blame and reflect shame. Welcome to the HHP Podcast. My name is Chris Franke, and I am the senior pastor of HFF.church in Oklahoma City. Join me and others from around the country as we talk all things Bible, church, and family. We may be right, we may be heretical, but that's for you to decide. Drop a like, a share, a comment, subscribe, and let's get to it. It's fairly common for human beings to project blame to someone or someone else. We also see this in the story of the fall of man. Rather than taking responsibility for his failure, Adam said, "It was the woman you gave me." Sometimes when, we're dealing with things, it's like, well, I did it because you did it, or I did it because you made me do it. Yet, interestingly enough, Adam was the one who was guilty of not protecting, maintaining, and providing the garden and ate the fruit too. I personally believe it was Adam who sinned first. And I know that's a hot topic debate, but Adam knew what his duty was. And if he had been doing what he was told to do by God, then I believe that there's a possibility that Eve would not have been talking to the serpent and they wouldn't have been where they were at. It's not necessarily a popular opinion, but I believe the fall of man was simply that. The failure of a man to protect his home, the garden, and his family, his wife. When Adam was confronted with his sin by the Lord, he projected the blame onto Eve, and he only reflected his own shame before the Lord. I think there's no maybe about it. Adam knew what he was supposed to do and not supposed to do, and he didn't do it. He did what he was actually told not to do. And then when he was found guilty of that, he didn't take ownership of his own decisions. And I want to examine the husband and wife relationship a little bit because it's one of the most intimate relationships that we have. And I believe a lot of times that in all my years of working in corporate America and working for ministries and all of that, a lot of times the problems we have at work, church, with our friends actually first manifests itself in the closest and most intimate relationships, which is traditionally with your spouse. Some of the rabbis' writings are pretty interesting. They compare the husband and wife relationship to that of the sun and the moon. And the moon is merely a reflection of the light that it is given from the sun, for the moon has no light of its own. So too, a wife's vitality depends upon the spiritual light that her husband shines on her. When he's kind and considerate, she radiates. When he's critical and stingy, she suffers in a dark cloud of sadness. Her state of mind and behavior depends upon him. See, there's some wisdom coming from the rabbi's writings. And one of the quickest ways I believe that any man can see where he stands with the Lord is to look at what's going on in his relationship with his wife. And I understand there's caveats and there's other factors, but just as a whole, after all, the Lord had created Adam and Eve to be a helpmate. So together, you're supposed to be the Hebrew word akkad. And if your problems in your marriage exist and they're not dealt with, I believe they will actually mirror problems in the relationship that you have with God, and it will manifest out into other relationships. If your home is a wreck and you're giving life or spiritual advice to any other person, then you're a hypocrite. I see a lot of hypocrisy going, whether it's on YouTube or it's Facebook. People flock to people for advice, but they have no idea what's actually going on in their home. The irony of that is you're listening to a podcast and maybe you've never stepped foot in my church. Maybe you've never watched our services, but I invite you to do your research. Look at my family. Look at my wife. We're not perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm definitely not the perfect husband. I'm definitely not the perfect father, but we absolutely strive to only counsel in areas that we're having success or we've actually produced fruit. And it should scare you to be called a hypocrite or to give advice to somebody else because you're witnessing on giving testimony and you're attesting to something that you don't know if you've bore fruit in. And ultimately, anytime we're teaching or we're giving advice or counsel, as believers in Christ, we should be doing that as a representative of Christ. And so we have to be careful about the comments and the criticism that can be debilitating or arrogant. We have to be careful of giving different types of counsel to things that we have no idea if we've actually produced fruit, or we absolutely do know that we've produced fruit and maybe it isn't great. The greatest legacy that you can leave to any church, any movement, any workplace, anything, is the legacy of your family. It's the legacy of who you were to your spouse, to your kids, and then to your career path, then to your financial sector, then to your friends. If you refuse to invest in your home, you will fail in the investments in other places, because ultimately you can't invest in all areas. You're not God. So invest in the places that matter the most. And that starts by taking responsibility for the actions you do. It starts by taking responsibility for the influence you have. And that starts in your home.
If this podcast has blessed you, please consider supporting by visiting our website and making a donation. For more resources, blogs, podcasts, please visit us at HFF.church. Looking for a church home? Join us for Saturday Church in OKC every Saturday morning, starting at 10:30.